Hey folks, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. As your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my wonderful co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady at the Change Physician. And for today's episode, we're going to talk briefly about relationships. And really this came out of a story that was in a other episode that we were having. And the reason I want to talk about this is a couple of things. One, I sometimes think that we as humans put less work into the things that matter the most than we would for things that really make no difference. Like people will spend hours and hours and hours or weeks to figure out what the perfect car is. And yet they will spend less time analyzing, homes or trying to do that in irrational ways. And they put even less time than thinking about the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've touched about it either on a Monday Motivation or somewhere else, but I'm a child of divorce. Ooh, I was in the 80s, latchkey kid, all that crap. And I actually it didn't hurt me in any way. I was actually glad. But what it did do, a couple of things. When you are in a single parent family, then who do you model? So then I was looking and I don't remember if I was necessarily, at some point I became conscious pretty early on that I was actually doing this. So you're looking at my friends whose parents were married and you're like kind of looking at their relationships and you're kind of like analyzing this stuff. Like what are they doing that works? But the other really interesting thing was when I was in college and the person I was dating, this is so stupid. We were going to meet up for something, but they had this class, and this class was a 3-hour long class. It was only offered on Wednesday evenings from like 6 to 9 or something. And it was called Human Sexuality. And it was popular. So I'm like, I'll go with you. Just, there was no reason. I think we were going to go out afterwards. Right. So I'm like, I'll go with you to class. And we get into this class and it's big. And the topic for that particular week was relationships. And the professor starts talking about it. And I'm like, holy crap, this is so good. I literally got a piece of paper and I'm taking notes. Like, this is not my class. I'm sitting here taking notes.
Yeah.
And the thing that has always sort of stuck in my mind was how she defined relationships. And she defined them in 3 different types. Again, I'm a simple guy. I like it when you can simplify this stuff. So she said there's A frames, there are H frames, and then there are M frame relationships. And what that is any relationship always has 2 people involved, right? So an A-frame relationship is when the 2 are so intertwined they lose their sense of self, right? They are now, so if something happens and they lost one, like maybe there's a breakup and someone leaves, the other is going to fall down because they have no support anymore. And so A-frames, people, this is sort of the Disney-esque thing and blah, 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 I just fall in love and I don't have to think about it or whatever, but you're so wrapped up and you lost your own identity. That is not necessarily healthy.
Right.
Then on the other hand is the H-frames. And the H-frames, I think maybe are a little bit more common. I'd like to maybe now. And what H-frames is, you have 2 individuals and they're more of an individual. They're actually more individuals than they are defined in the couple. Because if they haven't really defined anything as a sense of who they are as a group, as an entity of 2, instead they're still completely defined by the individuals that they are. So if you lose one or one leaves, there's no necessarily trauma, but when they're together, there isn't what you would call a necessarily healthy relationship, because you essentially have 2 individuals that are just kind of either cohabitating or co-whatever, but they're not necessarily a couple. And the last one that she said was sort of more of the model of, if we're going to use social norms or whatever, of a healthy relationship, was an M model, because now there's this interconnectedness between the 2, but each one of the individuals in that relationships are healthy enough on their own. They still have a sense of core identity, but together they make something bigger than themselves. And so if that relationship ends, because relationships end, and that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, it just is. But when that happens, there's going to be some pain associated with it. But you can then heal until you rejoin or find another person to form a relationship with. But it's not like, if a relationship ends and you don't care, then you probably didn't have a relationship. Because that's basically what we would call an H frame, right? And I'm just absolutely fascinated by that. And so I'm taking notes. And then since that time, I've actually looked at relationships in those terms. Like, well, how how are we dealing? How am I with this person? How are they with me? What are we doing with this stuff? And I also think it's actually really fascinating. So, I think we must have done an episode on this. So I read a lot about relationships because I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I get a little frustrated, I think, sometimes if people aren't as interested in it as I am, because I do think it's really, really important. Is we've talked about in previous episodes, what is more important than the number one choice you're going to make is who you're going to be with, what kind of relationship you're going to have. And so maybe it behooves us to study that a little bit more and to learn from other people's experiences, learn from the aggregate knowledge out there, so anyway, that was my very long story about me dating someone in college and walking into this class and coming out with this thing that has impacted me for, I guess, almost 30 years now. Like almost
Wow.
30 years. Yeah.
Well, and now you remember all those different, just the framework, so to speak, of those different different types of relationships. But it's interesting because I'm one of those that's kind of I don't think there was a lot of people's upbringings, they may not have a lot of dialogue about you know like in-depth conversations about really understanding and learning about different kinds of people. I think my upbringing was more of, what you shouldn't do, what's appropriate or not, and that kind of thing, behavior stuff. But I don't really recall having like an in-depth emotional like evaluation or assessment of kind of like what you're feeling, maybe the drivers or motivations of other men, or just sexuality in general. I don't think was a comfort thing with the generation of my parents, but I can't say that's everyone, because I know that there's a different level of connection with people my age with their own parents. But I think you're right. Like there was not a lot of insight or homework that I did. It's kind of like I just went about my life and I connect. It's like a little, what are those little games where you hit the
Oh,
you hit the little buttons on the side and they
pinball.
ping.
Pinball.
Pinball. Yeah, so I felt like, it was just kind of randomness. Like
Yeah.
I meet this person, and if there's a energy there, you just kind of like, if they weren't interested, well, I guess that's not going to happen. And then,
Wasn't
and
meant
it,
to.
yeah, not meant to be. Or then suddenly there's like both people are interested, just happens to be the right timing, but not a lot of reflection on kind of like what this person's potential, connect, like what their values are, what their there's all kinds of things you could assess from a personality, energy, like their stability, their drive. Like there's so many things that you can sit there and evaluate. And I don't feel like you have to necessarily find someone who's perfect, because there really is. After you live your life at this point in my 40s, I know that no one is perfect, but there's definitely certain things that are really good qualities if you want to have, if you want to have a marriage with someone, one person for the rest of your life. I put way more energy into studying for medical school and all of that requirement than I ever did into my relationships. So there was a lot of learning the hard way, for most of my 20s and into my 30s. And then I, of course, my current husband, I tried to, I was in this independent phase where I was like, I'm not interested in a relationship and da da da, you know how that goes, and then it turns into, a much deeper feeling for somebody. And then you realize, oh, well, this has turned into so much more. And of course, a very loving and affectionate husband. So I can't complain, but I think I kind of went around in my life where it was just, I'm very fortunate that I met my current husband. But the person I'd been married to before and my relationships before, um, I gave so much of myself, and the problem is that those people took advantage of it. And so when you're the kind of person that kind of is a little bit naive and you go into it thinking that you throw your love at somebody and they're going to return it just as equally with the same kind of respect, that doesn't happen, people, sometimes. So I think that learning your boundaries, especially for someone that was like myself, back then, that's really essential, but it's very uncomfortable to establish boundaries when you're not used to it. And so there's probably a lot more psychologically. You could have some psychiatrist psychoanalyze that situation, but there's a lot I've learned about the fact that you can't just throw everything at somebody, and you got to have a certain sense of value and respect for yourself to establish those boundaries so that you're not taken advantage of, but not in a way that you have to be an unloving person, or cold. I just think there's been a lot of lessons. Let me just put it to you that way. Stop me there, because I don't need to go any further. But
If I knew
um,
then what I know now.
yeah. Oh
And
man, I wish I had the perspective now back in my 20. But of course, everything that happened made me where I'm at now. But I'm
did
definitely
we talk
glad that.
about that in an episode yet? Like of the whole go back in time thing. If you knew what now, if you know
Have we
now,
done
if
one
you knew
like
then
that? I
what you
don't
know
think
now, kind
so.
of deal. Oh, okay.
I think we mentioned it.
Mention that. Yeah, because that's
Yeah,
the question is like it is all of those experiences led up to where you are now. So we can never, you go back and change those, and who knows who it would be. But
exactly.
from a relationship standpoint, it always is. It's just it's very interesting to me because there's almost this societal expectation, and it could, whatever your family environment is, and all this stuff, and relationships are work, like it's like anything. There's effort that's required to do it. Your health requires some effort in order to maintain it.
Right.
Your wealth, if we're going to put it that way, there's some work that's necessary in maintaining it. And certainly from a relationship standpoint, um, that just doesn't come. This whole, I do think Disney has had a huge impact there. I like Disney, but man, the Disney movies, some of them just piss me off. The older Disney movies, especially, like that Little Mermaid one. I won't even I'm like, oh, that she just makes me so mad. Like I told my daughter, even she was probably like 4 years old. And I'm like, oh, the Little Mermaid, we don't like her. And she's, why, Daddy? And I'm like because she gave away her most precious gift to some dude she didn't even know, right? She gave it
Mm,
away so that she could meet some guy, right? Because it
mm,
was her voice, and she gave just to meet this handsome prince dude. You don't know what the prince is. You don't know if he's a jerk or whatever. You That's your gift. Keep your gifts. Be an independent person, and then they can come to you and appreciate you.
yep.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
dude.
that's a powerful lesson right there. There's so much. I know I'm not the only person in the past that has, there's this need for seeking validation, seeking approval, and you could say it comes from parents that, you're trying to keep them happy, whatever it may stem from. But man, that's that seeking and always having to give and feel that acceptance, it's it's draining. It never ends, and you really deeply don't, like, you have to feel okay with yourself. If you don't kind of like create that boundary, and that has been such a journey for me, is recognizing that, okay, this is BS over here. You get so used to, like, either people wanting more out of you for their own selfish reasons, and if you don't break that cycle, then you never have the opportunity to finally, like, pull back and recognize that I'm good enough. You don't have to give everything of yourself. I'm like, this is like a huge topic for so many women, that and not just women, but I can say from conversations and seeing other people going through things, that there's so much effort that is put out that it's almost too much, um, giving. And boy, is that a lesson, that, I think, for myself, it's have to be conscientious, um, of that tendency. And if it's I'm at an age now where I'm like, okay, where even if you don't necessarily act on it, you start feeling it, like people are taking advantage. And my husband's really great at reminding me of, of putting the boundaries up. because it's funny, you do, when you're nice, when you try to be a nice person, it's unfortunately you're the person that they go to the most to get more out of, because you don't give them a lot of crap, you know? So, they're not going to deal with the person that's going to start cursing at them or give them hell. Go to the easy person, push them over a little bit. You get what you need. But at some point, saying no is okay. It's funny because for someone that tends to be a giver and nice, when someone else tells you no, you're not sitting there being totally pissed off about it. They're the ones that are able to put the boundary up. But what about you? So that's the kind of conversations you almost have to have with yourself to remind
Yeah.
you it's okay to say no.
It is okay to say no.
Yeah.
And I think we should end the episode there, because that makes me think we should do another episode in the future on boundaries, because that's a big deal. Right?
Yes.
Boundaries is a big deal when it
In our
comes to,
profession. Yeah.
and depending on what your training is, and my impression is, I think a lot of women physicians get put into very unfair scenarios when it comes to boundaries in medicine. But we will save that for a future talk.
Yes. I'm actually putting in our queue so we make sure that we talk about it. All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this lovely discussion, talking about, I just blanked. Because I just started thinking about boundaries.
You were
Help me
talking
out.
about relationships.
Yes. Well, we started with the relationships. We ended up with boundaries. So thank you for taking your time to listen from relationships to boundaries. That'll come up soon in a future host chat. I am Melissa Cady, the challenge doctor, obviously very distracted by all our multiple host chat topics. Here with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, on the Change Physician. And if you haven't heard about us, you come across us on Facebook, you can feel free to check out more about us at thechangephysician.com. You can find our podcast on all the typical venues. Feel free to rate, review, or comment. And you can always reach out to us at drkevin@thechangephysician.com. I got it right this time. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Take care, folks.